Hey everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex and this is Big Baby Reviews. Today is Wildcard Sunday where we look at things that are a little bit different from our regularly scheduled videos during the week and a regular cast of artists. So today we're looking at Superman the Man of Steel, issue number 37, cover dated September 1994. This is a crossover, part of the 0 Hour crossover that year. If you know anything about 0 Hour, it was another attempt by DC to kind of reestablish and restart continuity. They'd done it first with Crisis on Infinite Earths in the mid-'80s. Now, for some reason, already things had gotten convoluted and they tried it again. Not going to get too much into the details of that, but basically this issue is going to illustrate kind of the problem with that, with the different versions of characters from many different periods kind of coinciding in the same continuity and them resetting it to just the one continuity once again. Always loved this issue, even back in the day. Very nostalgic for this. It's a fun issue overall. You know, comics should be fun, and this is definitely a good example of that. I was not a regular collector of Superman the Man of Steel at all, but just the fact that I was at the time collecting 0 Hour, and I thought that this one just looked interesting. I was a Batman fan, so I bought this mostly because of the Batman aspect, or Batman guest starring in this issue. And what's fun about it is that the artist, John Bogdanove, who I think is one of the better Superman artists, to be honest, more dynamic maybe and electric and exciting with his artwork than the regular kind of cast of Superman artists out of the whole bunch. I think he's probably the best during this period. And his interpretation of Batman and interpreting Batman in many different ways, kind of you know, aping or swiping other artists' version of Batman in here on purpose, obviously, and it's just a lot of fun to see him do it. I think he does it really well. You have a good example of it on the cover here. I don't know if I could identify each kind of version of Batman here, but I'll definitely try my best. You know, that was kind of the fun of it back in the day. I think I might be a little bit more aware of other artists now today, where I can identify a few more than I could as I was a kid, as when I was a kid. So here goes. I might not get them all, but we'll see how far I can get. So if I start over here, I don't know for sure which one this is. These guys, maybe not enough information, although I do like this version here. Not quite sure where it comes from. This, I would definitely say, is the Frank Miller kind of Dark Knight Returns version, right? This, I would say, is the Neil Adams kind of feathered version, right? 70s version. You got the original Bob Kane version. Unfortunately, the hands were colored wrong. His gloves were purple, and here it just looks like he's got no gloves. Batman would be leaving fingerprints everywhere. Definitely here the kind of 1940s version by Dick Sprang. This one here, I believe, is the Bernie Wrightson version, the first guy to really draw the ears very long in the late 70s. This guy, I'm not quite sure either. I don't know who that would be. Not quite Jim Aparo, so I'm not sure on this one. Obviously, the Batman animated series here. You know, I said Dick Sprang over here. Maybe that's more Jerry Robinson. This would be more the Dick Sprang one. My mistake. This one here to me and this one are fairly similar. So, you know, are they both Carmen Infantino versions is the one I would go for. Probably for both. Definitely the Kelly Jones version right here. These guys obviously can't be identified just from the back of their head so much. And maybe this is the Jim Aparo version. I'm not quite sure. And this last one here is obviously an homage to the very first Batman serials, the first time Batman was on camera, right? Those serial episodes that would air before movies in the early 40s. So I definitely think that's where that is where that's coming from. And again, in 1994, when this book came out, and I was 13 years old, would not have had any reference to this, so I had no idea. I just remember looking at this going, man, that's a really bad looking version of Batman. So that's what we get on the cover, and we're getting a lot of those on the inside as well. So fun cover and a fun comic overall. Like I said, you can tell from John Bogdanove's line work here, you know, just more dynamic and more movement in the art than there ever was in any of the other Superman artists at the time. There's Jackson Guise, who's not a bad artist. There was Dan Jurgens, who's, again, very DC house style. So, again, I definitely think Bogdanove, I'm not quite sure, was the best artist. This is also the period where Superman just came back from the dead, and he's got the mullet. So that's why Clark Kent here has a ponytail. Not a great look for Superman, to be honest. I guess they thought by giving him a mullet and a ponytail, it would make Superman a little more cool. It didn't really work out. So yeah, here's, you know, Superman flying in to meet up with Batman. And I definitely think this is kind of the Neil Adams version of Batman. Like I said, Bogdanove is a pretty talented artist. and is able to pull off a lot of these looks. I do think sometimes though, you know, he's doing it himself in that style, and sometimes he's actually looking at classic illustrations by Neil Adams and other artists. For example, this headshot and this here definitely feels like a Neil Adams swipe. And in this case, not a swipe because he's doing it on purpose, right? And there's just like, he's meeting up with Batman, right? And he says, "And what has happened to you?" "Happened? Your hair, not going hippie on us, are you?" "Hippie? Why are you here?" So this is kind of the first clue Superman has that something's a little odd with Batman here. And this, he'll find out later, is not his universe's or his timeline's version of Batman, but definitely a Batman from the early 70s. And again, he'd be talking about hippies and stuff like that. But those hands, right? That's such a Neil Adams thing. The hands kind of, you know, pointed and emoting a little bit in different positions. Definitely a Neil Adams thing. So I'm going to skip through the other stuff because the most interesting stuff is really the Batman stuff. So this guy here gets accosted by, if you've read Dark Knight Returns, you'll recognize right away the Mutant Gang, right? And what should they be doing in regular DC continuity, right? And then boom, we get our first shot of Dark Knight Returns Batman, which I think looks really great. If John Bogdanov had done, you know, some artwork on Dark Knight Returns, I mean, it would fit right in. You know, if he had done a series with Frank Miller, I think it would have worked really well. He's got the big bulky version. The inking is a little dirtier and uglier, if I can say it that way. I remember when I first saw some images from Dark Knight Returns, I was used to a lot of the image stuff early on, and I thought that just the artwork looked horrible, to be honest. But then once I actually got the trade paperback, I think around the time when I was 13, I'd read it before I read this, I understood a little more clearly why the artwork was that way, and how great the storytelling was. So it didn't matter to me as much, you know. Batman was older, grittier, and the artwork reflected that. So some cool kind of shots of Dark Knight Batman. See, this one I know is for sure once again pulled from a shot from Dark Knight Returns, right? Maybe this one is, I'm not quite sure, but I definitely feel like that's pulled straight from Dark Knight. And even this shot here kind of resembles when he's standing over that first kind of criminal he's kicked, and he says, you know, he may walk again or something along those lines. You know, Dark Knight Returns is always kind of the dirty, hairy version of Batman, right? This drawing, honestly, I'll be honest, I copied a lot because I thought that was a really cool depiction of Dark Knight Returns Batman. I mean, I could almost believe Frank Miller drew this one here. Very close to the look of Dark Knight. And what an interesting thing where we've got Dark Knight Batman meeting kind of Neil Adams Batman here. And he's like, "Who are you? I'm Batman. And you? That should be obvious." So this, I know for sure, is definitely pulled from an actual Neil Adams drawing. And so is this, right? That's that same sequence in Dark Knight Returns where Batman's like, "These men are mine." Very, very exact, I would say, to that. And then it really gets interesting. Here's just an interesting visual, I think, with the screen tone and the yellow in the back. Just not something I'm used to seeing in a Superman comic. This almost looks something we'd see more probably in the 70s, right? And then boom, another Batman shows up, and this is obviously the rudimentary early on Batman drawn by Bob Kane. So even, you know, the pose and the anatomy, the body language is very rudimentary. Oh, this here, this is the year all the annuals were Elseworlds. I've covered one before, which was done by M.D. Bright, the artist. I don't remember the writer and stuff, but I really liked a few of those. I thought were pretty good. So this one here was done by John Byrne, and is an interesting story where Superman basically comes to Earth during colonial times and crashes in England, I think, or America, I'm not quite sure, but basically sides with the Brits, and so basically the American Revolution never actually happens. Very, very interesting Elseworlds. There were a bunch of really cool ones back then. Clearly the Bob Kane version, right? I think, again, every once in a while he just takes a straight up drawing straight from the old comics. Here's another example of him doing that here. And then all of a sudden the Neil Adams Batman kind of shifts into the Bernie Wrightson Batman mid-sentence. And then we get the classic shots here. Again, I think all of this is definitely taken directly from old Batman comics by Bob Kane. And if you look at comic swipes and stuff like that on the internet or on Facebook groups, this was actually swiped from a Tarzan comic or something like that by Bob Kane. A lot of swipes in the comic book world. I like this because there's like a heavy metal concert going on. And Batman from the late 30s is like, with noise like this passing for music, it no longer surprises me that the rubble that surrounds us passes for Metropolis. Got the purple gloves. And this is what I mean about John Bogdanov being such a dynamic, fluid artist, exciting artist. You know, not quite Image style, but maybe, you know, in his composition and anatomy is just the line work's a little more traditional, maybe, but just very powerful shot of Superman here. He always stood out from all the other Superman artists at that time. These, again, like I always feel when I see some of these, this one here and maybe this one here are actually taken from old drawings. This maybe is from Dark Knight Returns directly as well. Kind of an interesting effect up here with the screen tone. The various screen tones create the different layers. Pretty interesting. You know, this shot here could almost be pulled out of Dark Knight Returns. I feel even on Superman here, he's doing a slightly more kind of Frank Miller-y Dark Knight inking. Not fully, but, you know, maybe to make the look more consistent between him and Batman. But this definitely, you know, John Bogdanov could have, again, I'll say it again, I think him drawing a Frank Miller style Batman series with Frank Miller writing would have been pretty darn awesome. And here's a good example of what I mean about the ugly kind of look of Batman and the inking in Dark Knight Returns, which again I think Bogdanov has just a great handle on. Even this panel I think is great, right? He's kind of doing the Image broken up border that they did with quick inking, but just actually contouring it and making it an actual shape, which I think is really cool and works well here. I think it has to do with his layouts. His layouts are just way more dynamic than the other Superman artists. He's doing the tilted horizon. He's doing the Image panels, you know, overlaying onto others, creating those layers. You know, these two layer over this. This one layers over that. Kind of a Tom McFarlane thing, right? This panel here, again, that broken border. But, you know, some of the explosion breaking past that border is pretty cool as well. And again, I'm just going to get to more of the Batman stuff. So now Superman's brought him to a lab, some gentleman who's some sort of time expert, and he's kind of explaining to Superman that all these different versions are coalescing in one spot because of the problems in the timeline and the time zone, or whatever you call it, and obviously as it relates to the 0 hour crossover. So we're getting, again, those multiple versions. We got the Dick Sprang, we got the Carmen Infantino. This one, again, I think is kind of similar to the one on the cover I couldn't identify. I think it looks pretty cool here. I couldn't tell you what version he's trying to do here. I'm not quite sure. Bernie Wrightson once again. You know, Dark Knight here all of a sudden turns into Dick Sprang. Very interesting. Yeah, this one here, this one, that one. I don't know who that is. If anyone knows, please tell me. It's kind of an interesting looking version of Batman, but I'm just not sure exactly which artist he's referring to. Let me know in the comments if you know. Another cool shot of Superman here. Again, just above and beyond what the other Superman artists were doing, even at this time in the early 90s. I felt we're still kind of emulating the old school Superman thing. And, you know, Bogdanov is just doing a super dynamic, almost Image style Superman. So finally, we meet up with the actual version of Batman at that time in the early 90s, just after his back was broken. He's come back. So I guess this is typically what the look of Batman, to a certain extent, was at that time. Even though, for some strange reason, he's driving the old Batmobile, which I always thought was an odd choice. Especially since this is only 4 or 5 years after Batman 1989 and Batman Returns, where we got, you know, one of the coolest looking Batmobiles that was incorporated into some of the comic book versions of it. They never quite, I guess it depended on the artist, right? Norm Breyfogle had his version of the Batmobile, which was pretty darn cool, kind of a sports car, souped up sports car. But yeah, an odd choice to bring back the really old school Batmobile here. And of course, Metron from the New Gods shows up here. If we don't act soon, our worlds or universes will be gone forever. Metron, and I guess that's the tie-in to the actual 0 hour crossover. And then boom, we get another 0 hour anomaly because, you know, these are when John Byrne retold Superman's origin in the Man of Steel miniseries during or right after Crisis on Infinite Earths. This was kind of the redesigned look of Krypton and of Superman's parents. So all of a sudden, boom, Superman parents are alive, and Krypton, I guess, has not exploded. So I'm not quite sure where this ended up going because I didn't buy any of the other issues. I just wasn't, like I said, I was just buying this issue for the Batman appearance. But a fun issue and a fun issue artistically to see John Bogdanove interpret all these versions of Batman and through the artistic legacies of these older artists. That was pretty cool. And this always intrigued me. I never got the next issue, but I do like this almost Sam Keith version of Superman, I would say here. You know, Superman crossed with the Hulk, and that is still Bogdanove. So it shows you how versatile of an artist he is. Because here, I would say, this is almost like an image style drawing with all the musculature and stuff. Like I said, it's got, like, to me, it always had kind of a Sam Keith vibe in the look of the musculature and the inking and stuff. So yeah, maybe I'll seek that out at some point just because I'm curious. And there you go, guys. That is my review of this fun issue of Superman the Man of Steel, issue number 37, a 0-hour crossover. If you are still watching and you are subscribed, thank you so much for the loyalty. I really do appreciate it. If you're watching but you're not subscribed, please do so below. It only takes a quick second for you. Really helps us out, really helps the channel grow, and helps get us out there to other people who are into comic books just like we are. So everyone out there, thank you so much and have yourselves an awesome day.
Like, subscribe, like, subscribe!
King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KINGCOMICS.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.